There is an image of Walt Disney World that lives in the collective consciousness. It is an image of pristine perfection, of manicured lawns and vibrant flower beds, of streets so clean you could eat from them. It is the sound of cheerful music that follows you from land to land, and the sight of Cinderella Castle gleaming against a perfect Florida sky. It is a world built on meticulous control, where every detail, from the color of the trash cans to the sight lines from a pathway, is deliberately designed to maintain an illusion of flawless, effortless magic. Disney is a brand synonymous with polish, with presentation, with an almost obsessive dedication to sweeping any imperfection under the rug long before a guest could ever see it. But for nearly 20 years, hidden in plain sight, just a short boat ride from the Magic Kingdom, there existed a tear in this perfect fabric. A forgotten chapter in the Disney story allowed to remain open for all to see. A place where the music had long since faded, where the carefully planned landscaping had given way to an untamed wilderness, and where the illusion of perfection had been swallowed whole by the patient, relentless forces of nature. This was a corner of the kingdom where the magic had died. A wound left to fester on the edge of the most magical place on earth. Imagine a water slide, once a channel for joyous screams, now covered in a thick blanket of green moss. And tangled vines looking less like a ride and more like the ruin of some ancient aqueduct. Imagine a swimming pool, once crystal clear and teeming with happy families, now a murky, stagnant pond of black water, its concrete basin cracked and yielding to the roots of trees. Picture a rope swing dangling motionless over a patch of overgrown weeds where a deep pool used to be. The only sounds here are the chirping of crickets and the rustle of an armadillo in the undergrowth. This was not some forgotten landmark miles from civilization. This was a theme park. A Walt Disney World theme park. And its name was River Country. For almost 2 decades, this park sat abandoned, a ghost of its former self, slowly decaying within the boundaries of the otherwise immaculate Florida property. Its very existence was a paradox, a contradiction to everything the Disney brand represents. Its slow, public decay became the subject of fascination, whispered about by fans and documented by the daring few who trespassed onto its haunted grounds. The images they brought back were shocking. Nature not just reclaiming a space, but completely devouring a piece of Disney history. This brings us to the central question of this case file, the mystery that has intrigued Disney fans for years. Why? Why would a company that can reportedly replace a single scuffed paving stone overnight allow one of its own parks to suffer such a long, slow, and visible death? Why would they let a place built for laughter become a monument to neglect and decay? The story of River Country is more than just the tale of a forgotten theme park. It is a story about ambition, tragedy, shifting priorities, and the rare moment when the curtain is pulled back to reveal that even in the most magical place on earth, nothing lasts forever. No, in this case file, we are opening the archive on Disney's first ever water park to uncover the story of its joyful birth, its tragic turning point, and the strange, silent death that turned a piece of the Magic Kingdom into a modern ruin. Of course, here's the second section of the script, which explores the idyllic creation and heyday of River Country. The text is formatted and ready for narration. To understand what River Country became, we must first travel back to see what it was. In the mid-1970s, Walt Disney World was still in its infancy. The Magic Kingdom had opened its gates just a few years earlier in 1971, and the resort consisted of the park, a few iconic hotels, and thousands of acres of undeveloped Florida swampland. Disney executives were constantly looking for new and innovative ways to entertain guests, and crucially, to keep them on property and spending money for their entire vacation. Out of this ambition, a new, wholly original concept was born. Not another theme park with rides and characters, but a water-themed park, the very first of its kind. The idea was not to build a simple swimming pool with a slide. This was Disney, and the project had to have a story. The inspiration was a deeply American, nostalgic ideal, the old-fashioned swimming hole. It was envisioned as a real-life version of something out of a Mark Twain novel, a place where Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn would feel right at home. The park was designed to be rustic, charming, and seamlessly integrated with the natural environment. To enhance this feeling, it was built right on the shore of Bay Lake, Nestled beside the tall pines and cypress trees of Disney's Fort Wilderness Resort and Campground, it's a location that perfectly complemented its rugged frontier theme. The park's centerpiece, and its most ingenious piece of engineering, was Bay Cove. This half-acre sand-bottomed lagoon was designed to look and feel exactly like a natural cove of the much larger Bay Lake. To achieve this, Imagineers created a sophisticated water filtration system that was, at the time, revolutionary. A giant inflatable bladder was sunk into Bay Lake to separate the park's water from the lake itself, creating a controlled environment. Water was then pumped from the real Bay Lake up to the park's highest point, a man-made mountain of artificial rockwork cleverly themed to look like a natural feature. From there, the fresh lake water cascaded down through the park's slides and attractions, finally collecting in Bay Cove before being filtered and returned to Bay Lake. This constant circulation kept the water fresh and clean. But crucially, it was not the sterile, heavily chlorinated water of a typical swimming pool. It was real lake water, a decision that was key to the park's natural charm, but one that would have unforeseen and tragic consequences. When River Country opened on June 20th, 1976, it was an immediate sensation. It was a sun-drenched paradise of adventure. The main draw was the towering rockwork of the central mountain, which housed the park's slides. Whoop and Holler Hollow featured two twisting, turning body slides that sent guests on a serpentine journey down into the clear waters of Bay Cove. For a quicker thrill, Slippery Slide Falls offered to steep speed slides that shot riders out into the upper upstream plunge pool. Bay Cove itself was the heart of the park, a playground of activity featuring tire swings, boom swings, and a T-bar drop that gave guests a zipline-style thrill ride before they splashed into the water. For those seeking a more relaxed pace, Whitewater Rapids offered a lazy river where guests could float in inner tubes along a winding creek. When for the youngest visitors, the Cypress Point Nature Trail offered a quieter area with smaller slides and a sandy beach. For over a decade, River Country was a beloved institution. It was the perfect escape from the Florida heat, a place that felt both exciting and relaxing, adventurous and safe. It was the picture-perfect realization of its goal, a nostalgic, idealized American swimming hole, where families could create the kind of timeless memories Disney was built on. At the height of its popularity, it seemed like the laughter at River Country would never end. Of course, here's the third section of the script. This part deals with sensitive subject matter, and the tone shifts to reflect the serious, investigative nature of a case file. The text is formatted and ready for narration. For years, River Country existed as a postcard of carefree summer fun. But beneath the surface of this idyllic picture, the park's most unique feature, its reliance on natural lake water, held a hidden and deadly vulnerability. The very design choice that gave the park its authentic, rustic charm would become the source of its most enduring tragedy, an event that would cast a permanent shadow from which it would never fully recover. In August of 1980, an 11-year-old boy visiting from New York enjoyed a day of swimming and splashing in the warm waters of River Country. A few days after returning home, he fell violently ill with headaches, fever, and nausea, and was rushed to the hospital. Tragically, he passed away shortly after. The cause of death was determined to be primary amoebic meningoencephalus, a rare and devastating infection of the brain. The culprit was a microscopic organism, a single-celled amoeba called Naegleria fowleri. Naegleria fowleri is a thermophilic, or heat-loving, organism found in warm, freshwater environments all over the world, particularly in the southern United States. It thrives in the sediment of lakes and ponds, and while swallowing the water is harmless, there is a 1 in a million danger. If water containing the amoeba is forced up into the nasal passages with significant force, something that can happen when diving or going headfirst down a water slide, the organism can travel along the olfactory nerve and into the brain. Once there, it begins to destroy brain tissue, and the infection is fatal in over 97% of cases. An investigation was immediately launched, and health officials tested the waters of the park. They confirmed the presence of Naegleria fowleri in the water at River Country. The park's unique filtration system, which pumped fresh water from Bay Lake, is not designed to eliminate this naturally occurring organism. The decision to not heavily chlorinate the water, made to preserve the swimming hole feel, it left the door open for a natural predator to exist within Disney's man-made paradise. In the subsequent lawsuit, Disney was ultimately cleared of negligence. Their lawyers successfully argued that the amoeba was a natural risk inherent to any freshwater swimming in Florida, and that no other similar cases had ever been linked to the park in its 4 years of operation, despite millions of visitors. While legally sound, this defense did little to calm the public's fear. The story was a PR nightmare. The terrifying phrase brain-eating amoeba became inextricably linked with River Country's name, a whisper of danger that tainted its image of family fun. This was not the only tragedy to strike the park. Over the years, 2 other swimmers would lose their lives at River Country. In 1982, a 14-year-old boy drowned in Bay Cove, and in 1989, a 13-year-old boy met the same fate. While these incidents were tragically not uncommon for busy water attractions in that era and were unrelated to the park's water quality, they added to the growing perception that River Country, with its deep murky water and more naturalistic design, carried risks that were being engineered out of more modern water parks. The carefree innocence of the park's golden age was over. The perfect swimming hole now had a dark, tragic undercurrent, and the whispers of danger would continue to lap at its shores for the rest of its operational life. Despite the dark cloud of tragedy that hung over it, River Country did not close. Throughout the 1980s and into the 1990s, it remained a functioning part of the Walt Disney World Resort, a nostalgic and often overlooked corner of the property. The tragic incidents, while damaging to its reputation, were not the direct cause of its demise. The forces that would ultimately render River Country obsolete were not born from tragedy, but from progress. The park would become a victim of its own company's relentless drive for bigger, better, and more spectacular attractions. By the late 1980s, the theme park landscape was changing. The quiet charm of River Country, with its gentle slides and rope swings, was beginning to look quaint and dated compared to the new generation of water parks emerging across the country. And in 1989, its biggest competition opened right on its doorstep. Disney's Typhoon Lagoon was a quantum leap forward in water park design. It was massive, immersive, and thrilling in a way River Country could never be. Its centerpiece was a colossal wave pool, the largest in the world at the time, that generated perfect 6-foot surfing waves every 90 seconds. It featured towering speed slides like the Humunga Cowabunga, winding raft rides, and a shark reef where guests could snorkel with real tropical fish. Its theme of a tropical paradise devastated by a typhoon was executed with Disney's signature level of detail. And critically, all of its water was crystal clear and fully chlorinated, an implicit promise of a safer, more controlled experience than the murky, natural waters of River Country. Suddenly, Disney guests had a choice, and Typhoon Lagoon was the obvious one for anyone seeking high-energy thrills. River Country was instantly relegated to the number 2 spot. But Disney wasn't done. Just 6 years later, in 1995, they opened a third water park, Blizzard Beach. With an even more outlandish theme of a freak ski resort melting in the Florida sun, Blizzard Beach was designed for the ultimate thrill seeker. Its iconic centerpiece, Summit Plummet, was one of the tallest and fastest free-fall body slides on the planet, a terrifying 120-foot near-vertical drop. The opening of Blizzard Beach sealed River Country's fate. It was now the third and smallest choice in a resort that boasted 2 of the world's largest and most popular water parks. It couldn't compete. Its rustic, low-key charm was no match for the tidal waves and record-breaking thrill rides of its bigger, younger siblings. Attendance, which had already been impacted by Typhoon Lagoon, began to dwindle even further. River Country became a niche park, primarily enjoyed by guests staying at the adjacent Fort Wilderness campground, while most other visitors flocked to the newer, more exciting properties. Other factors were at play as well. Stricter state regulations for water parks, which were updated over the years, would have made operating River Country's unique lake-fed system increasingly difficult and expensive. Bringing the park up to modern standards would have required a massive investment, likely destroying the very natural aesthetic that made it unique. From a business perspective, It simply didn't make sense to pour money into an aging park with declining attendance, especially when two highly profitable modern alternatives were right next door. The final, decisive blow may have come from outside the resort's gates. The tourism industry as a whole suffered a massive downturn following the September 11th attacks in 2001. With attendance and profits falling across the board, Disney was forced to make difficult financial decisions. An underperforming, aging, and costly asset like River Country would have been an obvious candidate for the chopping block. The shifting tides of commerce and competition were pulling the park under, long before the final lock was placed on its gate. The end of River Country was not a singular event. There was no grand announcement, no farewell ceremony, no final day where guests could say their goodbyes. The park's closure was as murky and quiet as the waters of Bay Cove had become. It was a slow, creeping fade to black, a process that took years and created one of the most curious chapters in Disney history. On November 2nd, 2001, River Country closed its gates for what was supposed to be its normal, seasonal refurbishment. The summer season was over, the weather was cooling, and just like every year prior, the employees cleaned up, locked the turnstiles, and went home with the full expectation of returning the following spring to welcome guests once again. There was no indication that this was anything other than business as usual. That final day was completely unremarkable. Yet it would unknowingly become the last day that a paying guest would ever set foot inside the park. Spring of 2002 arrived, but the gates of River Country remained locked. The cheerful music did not return. The water did not flow down the slides. When questioned by the Orlando Sentinel newspaper, a Disney spokesperson gave a vague, non-committal answer, stating that the park would remain closed for the season, but that it could reopen in the future. If there is enough guest demand, this was the beginning of the park's descent into limbo. It wasn't officially closed, but it wasn't open either. It was simply paused. For the next few years, River Country existed in a state of corporate purgatory. It became Walt Disney World's resident ghost park. Eerily, the park's lights would still turn on at night, illuminating empty pathways and silent slides. Some visitors at the adjacent Fort Wilderness campground even reported hearing the faint, tinny sound of the park's old-timey background music playing to an audience of squirrels and dragonflies. It was as if the park's automated systems were still running, waiting for a command to resume operations that would never come. Meanwhile, Disney was quietly erasing the park from its present. New park maps were printed with River Country conspicuously absent. Guidebooks and brochures no longer listed it as an attraction. It was being systematically scrubbed from the official narrative of Walt Disney World, even as the physical park itself sat waiting. This prolonged silent shutdown is perhaps the strangest part of the entire story. Why not simply announce the closure and move on? The reasons are likely complex. The company may have been genuinely undecided. It's waiting to see how tourism would recover after the 9/11's downturn before making a final decision on the park. Or it may have been a deliberate strategy to avoid the negative publicity associated with permanently closing a theme park, preferring instead to let it fade quietly from public memory. The final confirmation of its demise came nearly 4 years after its last day of operation, and it arrived not with a bang, but with a whisper. On January 20th, 2005, in response to a direct query from the Orlando Sentinel, a company spokesperson issued a single, stark sentence. River Country has been closed and will not reopen. That was it. No press release, no grand explanation. It's just a quiet, buried confirmation of what everyone had long since suspected. The park didn't die in a single swift event. It was simply left behind, forgotten by the very company that had dreamed it into existence, and left to wait for a reopening day that the calendar would never deliver. With the final quiet confirmation of its closure, River Country officially ceased to be a theme park. But it was not demolished. It did not vanish. Instead, it entered a new and stranger phase of its existence. For nearly 2 decades, the park was simply left to the elements. Becoming a real-life ghost town in the heart of Walt Disney World, it transformed from a place of manufactured nostalgia into a genuine modern ruin. A powerful and haunting testament to the idea that nature will always reclaim what is left behind. Nature, the one force that even Disney cannot entirely control, began its slow and patient work. The Florida climate, with its intense sun, heavy rains, and relentless humidity, accelerated the process of decay. The iconic turquoise blue of the water slides faded under the sun, then became streaked with green and black as algae and moss took hold. Eventually, thick vines and creepers grew over them entirely, wrapping the once slick fiberglass chutes in a leafy shroud until they more closely resembled the ruins of an ancient Mayan temple than a theme park attraction. The park's carefully crafted rockwork, once a marvel of theme design, cracked and split as tree roots burrowed into its foundations. The pools became unrecognizable. The crystal-clear, filtered water was replaced by a stagnant black morass of rainwater and plant life. Fully grown trees began to sprout from the center of the concrete basins, their branches reaching for the sky from a place once filled with swimmers. The sandy beaches were overtaken by weeds, and the wooden boardwalks and bridges rotted and collapsed. Rusted signs, their paint peeling, still pointed the way to attractions that were now just swamps and thickets. It was a scene of profound and melancholy beauty, a post-apocalyptic landscape where the cheerful world of yesterday had been completely consumed by the wilderness of today. This forbidden, decaying world proved to be an irresistible lure for a new kind of visitor, the urban explorer. Intrigued by the idea of a secret off-limits corner of the otherwise perfect Magic Kingdom, these explorers began to sneak onto the property, armed with cameras to document the decay. It was a risky endeavor. Disney security was well aware of the park's allure and patrolled the area, and the explorers who were caught faced lifetime bans from all Disney properties. But for many, the risk was worth it. They were the unofficial archivists of River Country's afterlife. The photos and videos they brought back and posted online went viral, creating the modern legend of the park. They shared haunting images of the overgrown slides, the murky pools, and the ghostly, abandoned locker rooms. They documented the eerie silence of a place that should have been filled with noise. Without these explorers, River Country would have simply decayed in secret, but their illicit documentation ensured that the park, in its death, became more famous and more fascinating to a new generation than it had ever been in its final years of operation. Its story combined with that of its equally famous abandoned neighbor, Discovery Island, which sat just across the water, created the myth of a lost corner of Disney World, a place where the magic had not just ended, but had been left to rot. For 17 years, River Country sat in a state of arrested decay, a static monument to a bygone era. The urban explorers had documented its decline, and its legend was firmly cemented online. But the story of the land itself was not over. In 2018, nearly 2 decades after the last guest had passed through its turnstiles, Disney finally announced its plans for the site. The ghost park was about to be exorcised. The company revealed that the land occupied by River Country would become the home of a brand new Disney Vacation Club property, a deluxe resort to be called Reflections, a Disney lakeside lodge. The concept was for a modern, elegant, nature-inspired hotel that would celebrate the beauty of Bay Lake. The announcement signaled the definitive end. The ruin that had fascinated so many was finally going to be erased from the map. Shortly after, the sounds of nature that had filled the abandoned park for years were replaced by the roar of heavy machinery. Demolition crews moved in, and the process of dismantling the past began. The sight was jarring for those who had followed the park's story. The iconic, man-made mountain of rockwork, which had been the park's centerpiece, was systematically torn down, reduced to a pile of rubble. The water slides, already covered in years of grime and vegetation, were ripped from their foundations and hauled away as scrap. The last vestiges of the old swimming hole were unceremoniously destroyed. Interestingly, some parts of the park were not completely removed, but simply buried. The concrete basin of the upstream plunge pool, one of the last recognizable features, was filled in with dirt, entombing the final piece of River Country beneath the foundation of the future. But in a final strange twist to this long story, the future has yet to arrive. After the land was cleared and some initial foundation work for the new resort was laid, the project came to an abrupt halt in 2020. The global pandemic had paused major construction projects across Walt Disney World. And Reflections was one of the most prominent casualties. Today, the site sits in a new state of limbo. It is no longer the overgrown, romantic ruin of River Country. Instead, it is a cleared, silent construction site, waiting for a project that may or may not ever be completed. The land seems destined to be a place of quiet waiting, The story of River Country is a story of how even the most magical places are subject to the relentless march of time. Its closure was not the result of a single, dramatic event. It was a death by 1,000 cuts. It was the tragic legacy of a rare accident, the commercial pressure from its bigger and better siblings, and the simple economic reality that it was no longer worth the investment. It was a pioneer, Disney's first water park, and a place of genuine joy for a generation. In its long, slow death, it became something else entirely, an unintentional monument to the power of nature and a powerful symbol of impermanence in a kingdom built on timelessness. The land by the lake, once a perfect swimming hole, then a famous ruin, now sits quiet again, waiting for its next story to begin.